Locals in northern Michigan didn't call it a park. They didn't call it a trail. They called it the crooked forest, like it was a thing with its own name and its own mood. The trees there weren't normal. Every trunk bent sharply near the ground, twisting like something had forced them to bow. Photographers came for the strange shapes. Hikers came for the quiet. But people who lived nearby, they came only in daylight. Because the stories weren't about getting lost, they were about getting noticed. In 1997, a graduate student named Marin Ellis arrived with a camera, a notebook, and the kind of curiosity that makes warnings sound like superstition. She was writing about environmental anomalies, why the trees grew that way, what caused the curve. She planned to stay 2 days. She stayed 7. On the third evening, she recorded something in her journal. It feels like the forest is leaning in. That night, she heard footsteps outside her tent, slow, barely, pressing into the soil. She unzipped the flap, expecting a deer. Instead, she saw a figure between the trees, a woman. A woman, standing completely still, too far to see her face, too close to be accidental. Marin called out, polite at first. "Hello? Are you okay?" The woman didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there among the crooked trunks like she belonged to them. Marin told herself it was another camper, someone playing a joke. She zipped the tent and forced herself to sleep, but sometime after midnight she woke again, and the woman was closer, not walking, not approaching, just closer than before, a pale shape between bent trees, as if the forest had shifted her forward. Marin's throat went dry. She whispered, barely audible, "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head, and for the first time, Marin noticed something wrong. Her dress looked old, not costume old, old like it had never belonged in this century, and her hair hung went, as she'd just come out of rain. Even though the night was clear, Marin didn't sleep after that. At sunrise, she packed to leave, but when she stepped onto the trail, she saw it. Footprints, bare feet, circling her campsite, dozens of them, all pressed into the dirt like someone had walked in loops for hours. And at the edge of the prints, carved into the dark of bent pine, was a symbol Marin hadn't made, a crooked spiral, like the trees, like a fingerprint. She drove into town shaken. At a diner off Route 31, she asked an older waitress if anyone camped in the forest at night. The waitress stopped, wiping the counter. Her voice dropped. "You saw her, didn't you?" Marin froze. "Saw who?" The waitress leaned in. "The woman who doesn't leave." And then she said the sentence Marin would never forget. "Once she knows you've looked her, she starts looking back." Marin didn't want to believe the waitress. Small towns collect legends the way forests collect fog. But something about the woman, something about the footprints, made the story feel less like folklore and more like a warning that arrived late. She tried to laugh it off. "What do you mean she doesn't leave?" The waitress didn't smile. Instead, she poured coffee like she needed her hands busy. "They say she was here before the road was paved, before the cadence, before the park signs." Marin's stomach tightened. "So she's what? A ghost?" The waitress shook her head slowly. "No, ghosts are leftovers." She glanced toward the window where the morning sun made everything look safe. "She's still part of it." Marin left town that afternoon. She told herself she'd gotten spooked, that exhaustion had made her imagination sharp. Back in her apartment 2 hours away, she unpacked her gear, showered, tried to return to normal life. But that night, something small happened. She opened her notebook and saw a page she didn't remember writing. a crooked spiral, drawn again and again, tighter each time, ink pressed so hard it tore the paper. At the bottom, a sentence, "Do not look twice." Her breath caught. She lived alone. No one else had touched her things. The next morning, she emailed her professor asking to switch topics. No more forest anomalies, no more crooked trees. But the professor replied with a single question. "Did you see her?" Marin stared at the screen. She hadn't mentioned a woman. She hadn't mentioned footprints. Only the location, only the forest. That evening, she drove back, not because she wanted answers, because the spiral was in her head now, turning like a thought she couldn't stop. She parked near the trailhead just before dusk. The forest looked the same, bent trunks, still air, birds too quiet. She walked only a few minutes before she noticed something new. Ribbons, thin strips of cloth tied to branches, dozens of them, some fresh, some so old they'd rotted into thread, like offerings or markers. And then she saw the first photograph nailed to a tree, a missing flyer, a man in his 30s, last seen near Highway 112. Then another, a teenage girl, then another, a family of three, all vanished near the crooked forest. Marin's hands trembled. This wasn't a single ghost story, this was a pattern. And at the center of it was the woman. She turned to leave. That's when she heard it. Not footsteps, not whispers, a sound like fabric dragging over bark. She looked up. Between two bent pines, the woman stood again, closer than ever. Her dress hung heavy, wet at the hem, her face still hidden in shadow, but her head tilted as if she was studying Marin, as if she recognized her. Marin's voice cracked. "What do you want?" The woman lifted one arm, slowly, not pointing, not waving, just raising it toward the trees. And Marin understood with sudden, sick clarity. She wasn't being threatened. She was being invited. Marin should have left. Every instinct she had was screaming for distance, for light, for roads with names and people and noise. But the woman's raised arm, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an expectation, as if the forest had been waiting for her curiosity to become something else, something closer to surrender. Marin took one step back. The woman didn't move. Marin took another. Still nothing. Then impossibly, the trees creaked. Not from wind. There was no wind. The bent trunks groaned softly, like old wood shifting under pressure, and the spiral carved into the dark beside Marin looked darker than before, fresh, as if it had been cut moments ago. Marin's flashlight trembled in her hand. "I am not going," she whispered. The woman tilted her head again, and then she did something Marin still couldn't explain later. She stepped sideways and disappeared behind a tree no wider than a fence post. Marin blinked. The tree was too thin to hide a person. There was nowhere she could have gone. Marin moved forward before she could stop herself. The air changed immediately, colder, thicker, like walking into a room where something has just stopped breathing. She reached the tree, looked behind it. Nothing, only darkness between crooked trunks. Then she noticed the forest was wrong. The trail behind her was gone, not hidden, not lost, gone. In its place stood more trees, bent inward like ribs. Her phone had no signal. Her compass spun uselessly. And somewhere deeper inside, a sound began, not footsteps, not whispering, a low hum like distant singing through soil. Marin turned in circles, trying to find the opening she'd come through. The trees didn't change, they only leaned, always leaning toward her. Then she saw movement. The woman again. farther ahead, waiting, not chasing, never chasing, just always placed where Marin needed to look next. Marin's voice rose in panic. Why are you doing this? The woman lifted her hand and pointed, finally, at something behind Marin. Marin froze, slowly turned and saw them. Shapes between the trees, not shadows. People, dozens, standing still, faces pale, eyes open, clothes from different decades. A man in a modern hoodie, a girl in a dress from the 70s, an older couple holding hands, all silent, all watching. Not trapped like prisoners, but held like photographs, preserved. Marin backed away, choking on her own breath. No, no, this isn't real. The woman stepped forward, close enough now that Marin could see her face, and it wasn't monstrous. That was the worst part. She looked human, tired, ancient. Her eyes were full of something heavier than hunger, recognition, and her lips moved, barely forming sound, not a warning, not a curse, a simple truth. The forest bends what it keeps. Marin stumbled, tears spilling. I don't want to stay. The woman's expression didn't change, as if wanting had never mattered here. The humming grew louder, the trees creaked again, and the last thing Marin saw was the spiral carved into every trunk around her. Thousands of them, like fingerprints, like a record, like the forest singing its name. Marin Ellis never returned. Search teams found her tent, her camera, her notebook. On the final page was a single sentence written in shaking ink. She is not lost. She is collected. And to this day, hikers say that if you stand in the crooked forest at dusk and look between the bent trees, you might see a woman in an old dress, not hunting, not haunting, just waiting for someone curious enough to look twice.